Intro video. What the heck is that? Yeah, we're live. It is 6:21. Took a little bit of time to set this up. You can see here in the photo. In the photos, what we're going to be talking about today. Today we are going to take a look at turbo versus supercharger, and more than just that, we're going to be looking at what looks like, at least on the power curves, a mistake. And I'm thinking it's a mistake in tuning. And I want to know what you guys think. I want you guys to let me know if you think that if this is an indication of an issue. There's really no way for me to go back and look at the data in terms of the tune, because unfortunately this was all done. This was a test I did. This is a 1995 Honda Del Sol with basically a stock V16 in it. It had a header on it. We ran it with an air intake because we ran this thing naturally aspirated. And then we also ran it with a Jackson Racing supercharger. And then we ran it with this Vortech supercharger. You can see pretty cool kit. It has a drive assembly because it drives off of the factory damper off the B16, but they have to run a transfer shaft to position the blower on the other side, over on the distributor side of the motor, and then the blower blows into, in this case, it's an air and water intercooler. You can see we just had lines hooked up, and we were running, I think we were just running water from the tap off of this thing and to feed this thing. It was just a kind of a constant loss, let's say, during the testing. And then we ran it at 7 pounds, we ran it at 10 pounds, and then we ran, like I said, we ran that, and then we also ran this turbo kit. This was from TURBONETICS back in the day, as a kit that they offered for B series Hondas. You can see it had kind of a cast manifold design. It had a centrally located wastegate, which had good control. This one had an air-to-air intercooler on it. You could see, eagle-eyed viewers will note, hey, take a look at the cold air intake that Richard always says you have to have. Otherwise, if you look at where the turbo is positioned on this, typically Honda radiators, you have one of two designs. You have a small design, like the short one, that runs about halfway across the front of the opening in the vehicle, or it runs all the way across, depending on whether you have AC or what you have. And at any rate, what happens is, as the air flows through the radiator, the turbo, if I didn't have this cold air intake on it, would just be drawing air coming from the radiator, basically the fan wash, because it's got an electric fan on it running off of the radiator. So I ran a piece of corrugated tubing, which they included in this kit. I think it came with this kit. And then I just have, it accepts a 3-inch, basically this is the part of an RS Akimoto kind of air intake setup. So it's a radius entry that connects to a 3-inch tube. It's a filter on a stick, kind of is what we used to call them. And in any case, this had a cold air, and then so did the Vortech, so that we could get cold air going into the motor. They also had intercoolers on them. Like I said, we only ran them on 10 pounds or whatever. But what I want to show you is a comparison to basically how well each one of them ran. See, you've got our adjustable fuel pressure regulator on there. This one had a long tube header on it, and we'd run that on many things. I think otherwise this thing was stock, and it still had no cams in it, factory cams, factory head, factory. In fact, it was one of the JDM motors that we bought that you used to be able to buy those for a couple $100 back in the day when I was racing, road racing the Still Sol, and it had a P30 intake manifold on stock throttle body and stuff. And so I think it made 140 something, 148 or something at the tire when it was NA, with a, filter on a stick, kind of air intake and a header on it. And then we put these blowers and turbos on. You can kind of see, the interesting thing is, if we take a look at this, here's an interesting thing. Like, these are the boost curves for these two things. And one of the lower one is the boost curve. Both of them made 10 pounds, or right at about 10 pounds, as close as we could get. And one of the lower curve is the Vortech, and it made 10 pounds, but didn't do it till 8,000 RPM, basically. And the turbo had 10 pounds, from about 5,500 RPM on out. But even down at 4,000, it had like 8 or 8.5 pounds. So you could see how the turbo comes up, because what we're doing on the chassis dyno here, and this is this is why when I'm talking about doing boost tests or response tests on the engine dyno, it's difficult because it doesn't give us what this gives us. This gives us the boost curves. Like on a centrifugal, an engine dyno can easily do this. Like if we were to start the run at 2,000 RPM like we did here, you started at 2,000. Even on an engine dyno, on a centrifugal, you're going to have a rising boost curve. It's going to do that on the engine dyno. A turbo, unfortunately, doesn't do the same thing because you have an artificial load on the engine dyno. But on the chassis dyno, all we did was start the wheel rolling and then nail the throttle. And then what happens to the boost curve happens to the boost curve. You might argue that a chassis dyno, because of the weight of the roller and the resistance therein, and versus the vehicle, the weight of the vehicle, and then the gearing and all. So you could argue that, well, that's not the same as it is on the out in the street or out in the real world or on the track or wherever. The boost curve is going to vary. It's going to be gear dependent because you're changing the load. So the boost that you get in lower gears oftentimes is not what you get in higher gears. But this was a good test because it shows a relative change in the boost curves of the two different types of forced induction. Both of them basically 10 pounds, but one of them not getting to 10 pounds until 8,000 RPM. Because when I did this test, I said, okay, well, the only really measurement that we're going to be able to do, the only variable that we can really rely on is they both have to make the same boost. Now, I did this also with the Jackson Racing Supercharger as much as we could. The Jackson Racing Supercharger, I don't know if we had the pulleys and everything to quite get to 10 pounds on this combination. We just had trouble supporting that power level given the size of the blower. But we can see the differences in the boost curves of the Jackson Racing Supercharger. We could talk about that later, but it had a similar thing. It actually had a rising curve like this. It had a rising boost curve. And to some extent had a power curve more like the Vortech than the turbo because it also had a short runner manifold. Part of the packaging for that positive displacement blower, it was a little M45 or an M62 Eaton supercharger, but because it had mounting that thing where the intake manifold goes between the motor and the firewall basically necessitated that it had a short runner intake if you're trying to package all that together. So because of that, it loses a bunch of torque relative to having a longer runner P30 intake manifold, which both of these enjoyed because they were just blowing into the factory manifold. So it still had, it wasn't positive displacement and runner length kind of thing, which is kind of typical of a lot of these positive displacement builds. But you could see that the turbo has a lot more boost through most of the curve. I mean, we hit it at, like I said, we hit it at 2,000. The turbo was sized pretty well for a stock V16. You can see that's a pretty good power curve. We're into full boost before VTEC, which is good. And then it's carrying boost all the way through VTEC, which is the good part of the curve. Whereas on the Vortech, at the VTEC crossover point, let's say that it's 52 or 5,500, it's got 3.5 or 4 pounds there. So it's not, as opposed to having 8.5 or 9 pounds there. It's not, and so you could tell just looking at these boost curves, your goes, oh yeah, I know which one of those would accelerate better than the other one. And so here's the other thing. We take a look at power curves. The one that's higher, this is horsepower. Blue is horsepower, turbo versus Vortech. And red is torque, turbo versus Vortech. And you can see, not surprisingly, given the boost curves, that the turbo made more power through all of the curve. We actually ran the Vortech a couple hundred RPM past 8,000 where it continues to rise, where the turbo did not continue to rise. It kind of stayed stationary. It actually fell off down below 10 PSI. If you look at that boost curve, started falling off a little bit, where the Vortech wanted to keep going, which is why when we were doing these Vortech motors, when we were doing these land speed things, we were revving the motor. We were revving the motor higher than this. But you can see that the turbo setup makes a lot more average power. It had a lot more average boost. Therefore, it's going to make a lot more average power because when you have the pressure there, you're going to have the power there. I mean, we've got a big change in torque at, let's say 5,000 RPM. The difference is like, I don't know, let's call it 50 foot-pounds. And for something that was only making 100 foot-pounds, 50 foot-pounds is a 50% change. So that's a huge amount. And so, not surprisingly, obviously, this is, both of them were fun. Having boost better than NA, so all better, but one of them clearly has more boost than the other, and then clearly more average power production. The turbo also, but it doesn't really come into play here, but the turbo also doesn't have the losses associated with driving a supercharger, which the Vortech would. I don't know if a transfer shaft has more parasitic loss because we're driving more, essentially driving kind of a transmission for the Vortech. I don't know if there's too much loss on that spline setup the way that they have it set up, but the Vortech was awesome, climbed and boost, kind of the way a VTEC motor feels anyway. So we drove it around a lot. It was a lot of fun like that. But the turbo stuff, and this really came into play more so when I was doing the single cam version, when I had a D16 in my 90, I don't remember if it's a 93 or 95. I think I had both of those, a little SI hatchback. But we were trying to get it to go 150 miles an hour, and we were trying with a Jackson Racing Supercharger. We're doing a bunch of things. We did the blower, did a header, because it had no intercooler on it, which both of these enjoyed. Both of these had intercoolers on them, and the Jackson Racing did not, because that's the way that it came. But we would run. I remember doing the single cam thing. We would run water injection, the IRL, I think or ERL water injection on it, to get the charge temperature down, because it was way hot. It was 300 degrees when we were doing these top speed runs. So it was not, it was not good, because we were running, I think we were running like 13 pounds or something on that single cam to try to get it to do that. We ended up hurting one of the pistons doing that, but we tried some Good cams back then, some from Bill Good. We tried a couple of different things, and then after just putting the turbo on, I was like, look, voila. Because I remember trying to get to like 200 at the tire with this setup, and it was like, it's so much easier. It was just so much easier with the turbo. But what I want to point out here is I want you to take a look at the lower torque curve on the Vortech. So I want you to look specifically, if you can kind of see. Let's see if we can see that. I can't really. Let's see if we can make this bigger. Yeah, so you should be able to see that better now. Hopefully, it's showing up the way that it's showing up in my thing. If you look at the Vortech torque curve between, let's say, 4,400 RPM and 5,500 or 5,600 RPM, there's a big dip in the torque curve on the Vortech. And knowing what I know about Vortex and B16 motors, that shouldn't be there. And let me know what you guys think. Do you think that should be there? Does that look like a dip? Does that look like a natural dip? Doesn't it look like if you just took a ruler and laid it down here at the bottom across the torque curve from 2,500 to 3,000 and to 4,000, and then the ruler would just go straight across, and at 5,500 and 6,000, so all that would just be kind of a flat climbing torque curve, let's say, except for that dip. And so this is what I like to do. I like to go back and take a look at these dyno results. And when I look through them, because it's been years now, a decade or more than a decade since I ran that test, I'd like to go back and look at this through essentially fresh eyes, and I look at it as an outsider now. And I look at that and go, that shouldn't be there. Why is that there? And you can let me know what you think about. Let me know what you think about that. Let me know if you think. I think it's timing. I think if I could, I did. Obviously, we don't have that. I think if I go back and look, I think what's happening here is probably because we were at low boost. If we look at that area on the Vortech relative to the boost curve. Yeah, so between 5,500 and 6,000, yeah, we're looking at like 5 pounds or something. So we look in that area. If we were to look in that area of the map on the Honda, like at 5,000 at that VTEC, it's kind of near the VTEC crossover point. If we look at the power curve again, it's actually, well, it's a little bit before that. So it's at the end of the primary cam. in the beginning of the VTEC cam. My guess is in that range that we probably had a change in timing there during the crossover point, before and right after the crossover point, before when we activated the VTEC. That's my guess. I don't think it should look like that. I mean, even if it went straight across, we're talking about a change of, let's say 10 foot-pounds or something like that. Let's say that it was that much. It's not going to be a lot, but it's going to be some. It's going to be straighter. The turbo's still going to have way more because it has 150, 60, 170 something foot-pounds at that point, and at that point, the Vortech is only going to be 130 or something. So it's still a lot different in favor of the turbo. But like I said, I look at these things and I immediately zoom in on these irregularities even in my own testing. Like I said, if this is 20 years old, I go back and look at this and go, oh yeah, that shouldn't be like that. I wonder what's going on there. And maybe sometimes when you're testing and trying to run 3 different, forms of forced induction run on the same motor on the dyno, in the middle of them doing all of their work and doing more, it's a lot. But like I said, I like to go back and look at that stuff and kind of see what's going on. And so I'm critical even of my own stuff, because I'm here to try to help present stuff and help people with, making power and showing them what things do. And I want it to be as accurate as I can. And I obviously strive to do that, to try to make, we know that out the horsepower curve and stuff, we know that those values are the same, but, and we made the values the same, probably ran the turbo setup first, I think, and then put the values in where we knew that the boost was going to be, but maybe not on the whole curve or something. It's hard to go back and remember doing all that tuning, which on the Honda, I did an endless amount of tuning on all of the chassis dyno stuff for the Vortech stuff and for the turbo stuff and all that on the B16, on the land speed record Civic, and on this thing right here. On this thing, you can kind of see that, because all of the Honda stuff, I used Honda on it, and we ran a lot of stuff. So it's doing a lot of that. And 20 years ago, I can't remember. Oh, did you put timing in at 4.5 pounds on the primary cam at this RPM? And because you just can't, there's no way to remember that stuff. At least not for me. Not when you do a bunch of that. But this was cool stuff, and being able to do it on this Del Sol. This Del Sol was the one that I won one of these trophies up here for road racing for the U.S. Touring Car Championship. Obviously, we didn't run it with any one of these forms of forced induction. It's just a natural aspirated deal. But it turned out that not only was it a really good and successful road race car, and that's what I bought it for. And I ran this car in the Motorola Cup even before this for endurance racing, which was a lot of fun because you get a lot of seat time doing that. But then it turned out to be a really good platform for swapping engines into and trying different things. This thing had all kinds of different motors in it, the LS VTEC hybrids, and we had B18Cs in it, and non-VTEC motors and different transmissions to try different things. And it was really a cool test platform. It's nice to have that, so we could also do, in fact, back when I had this, I was primarily doing chassis dyno stuff, not nearly as much engine dyno stuff. And then when the Westech guys were able to get their setup hooked up back when they had the 901, and it didn't have a directional vane, that we could run these things, we could run them in reverse, basically. So we could run these reverse rotation motors. So I did a bunch of engine dyno testings too, which was very, very fun. But it was, again, not without its challenges, but very, very cool stuff. Let's see what you guys got going on for a Sunday night. Turbo versus blower. Neil, Larry, what's going on? Upstate New York's in the house. How long of a garden hose do you need for that intercooler? We did use that, but the nice thing about this is and even more so the front wheel drive thing, is that part of the car stuck out of the building, and the faucet that we were using was essentially just right next to the car. And so we only needed a short length of hose, and then it would just drain. So we turned it on and off for that. It would be good. Engine dyno, you know, I feel about chassis dynos. Yeah, but this was a manual transmission, and so this thing was really, really repeatable. Oh, what? I never knew that Vortech made a kit for Hondas. I've seen other superchargers for K24s, Craftworks. Yeah, that's all fairly modern stuff. This was way back in the early 2000s. Those D16 engines can make a lot of power. Yeah, this is a B16, but the D16 stuff, I did a lot of testing and wrote a couple of books on those too. This was a B16A, and if you want to know what model it is, this was a 1995 Civic Del Sol SI. So it was an original. It originally came with a B16, so it was a B16 from the factory. And then also, like I said, also did lots of testing with D16s because I had a couple of other Civic hatches as well. Is the Vortech the more linear looking graph? Yes. Was this on 93 and how much timing did it have? No, it was not on 93. It was on good gas so that we could put all of the timing in and make all of the power. Tend to find things and wonder what the heck was I doing. Yeah, VTEC did kick in. It sounds amazing when VTEC kicks in. What crankshaft, forge, or cast is a better choice for the turbo versus supercharger application? Well, this had a factory crank in it, which all of my B series stuff did. I never put any sort of aftermarket crank in it. And you can run forge cranks on either one of those. I don't know what specific application you're talking about. All of the junkyard motors I run, those are all cast cranks. Some of the, when I was doing testing back in the day, some of the things had forge cranks, like the Honda stuff. The Cobras on the 4-valve stuff had factory forge cranks in them. It's a reasonable price for a 4.6 valve. My buddy said he thinks it's a 2000. I can't remember if he said it's a B or C head. A 2000 is a C head, but I don't think did they make it in 2000? What year didn't they make it in? I thought they switched from 99 to 2000. But at any rate, you should be able to go, if you can find them in the wrecking yard, it's all the same price. Otherwise, I don't know on the Cobra stuff. 68 volts, 455 power Tornado, and you're gonna put Sniper on. Okay. I think Honda killed VTEC. They got rid of it for new models. It's hard to believe that they would not have VTEC, although they have been embracing forced induction, but most of their stuff is forced induction and VTEC. And not only VTEC, but VTEC-I, so 2 different cam profiles and variable cam. And so that's a good thing. My son's 2000 EM1 has a D16 with a turbo kit on 10 PSI, and that's good. What is an EM1? Did you see Kyle, the twin engine Prelude? I haven't seen that. The Civic that I ran is a 99 2000 SI. So that's, look, I still, even today, I like the looks of those. It looks kind of like a BMW, in my opinion. Let's bring back memories of 10 of the best events we used to compete at years ago. We were running at Rover, but some of our friends were running Hondas, Civics, and Rexes. Yeah. The Type R's are really cool. I remember driving a Type R when they first came out. The guys at Sport Compact Car were at Willow Springs. And so they said, can you take this around the track? And I said, yeah. I said, it'd be awesome. Because they were, at the time, they were building a GSR. And they'd done a bunch of things to it. You know, wheels and tires and coilovers and suspension and air intake and header and whatever. And so the GSR, they had done it up. And so we got to drive that on the track and then got to drive the Type R. And I'm like, oh, yeah, those guys at Honda, those guys know what they're doing. The Type R was just so nicely balanced. Tornadoes, like driving your couch down the freeway at 130. I've never been 130 in a Tornado. I have in a Cadillac. And it was pretty floaty. Have you considered testing knock sensors to retard timing? What do you mean testing them? to see if they work. Do you think Honda intentionally raised the VTEC RPM so there's a dramatic shift in power? On factory ones, no, they actually wanted it to be a smooth transition. And that's how you tune a VTEC, is you want there to be the least amount of change in the torque curve. So you don't have a big drop, and so you don't have a big jump. So depending on whether it's a jump or a drop, that dictates what you do by shifting that curve. But the factory wants it to be smooth. Basically what it does, it just continues with, I mean, it's a little bit of a jump, but they continue with a flatline torque curve kind of. And so if you do that, if you keep making the same torque at a higher RPM, you have a rising horsepower curve. Integra Type R is still one of the finest, most funnest cars I've driven. I agree. And I know that I've driven lots of fast cars and stuff, and driven road race cars, and that Honda I drove as a time attack car, and went really fast in that car at Bonneville. But that day that I drove that stock Type R at Willow Springs will always stay with me. It was impressive. Like I said, the balance of that car was just, oh, this car feels right. 140 in a dually that seems like a lot. I'm taking my wife to be in my 68. Nice. Vortech small block Chevy or LS Vortech versus a Honda Turbo. I don't know what you mean. What is your question? To see if you can retard timing with knock sensors. Could be a cool way to do it. You can most definitely retard timing with factory knock sensors. That's what the factory does. Is that what you're talking about? The topic tonight? No, it's the other topic tonight that I want to talk about. We're talking about blowers versus turbos, but Vortech Supercharger, not a Vortech small block Chevy. See, here's the Vortech Supercharger versus a turbo on a Honda. The other thing I want to mention is at richardholdenerperformance.com, we have a sale going on until the end of this month, so the next 3 days. Anything that you buy, you got to buy more than one thing. So if you buy a cam and springs, or a cam and a billet boost block, or 2 billet boost blocks, or springs, or whatever you buy, as long as there's 2 of them, you get a free shirt. All you have to do is send, if you do an order, send an email to Jimmy, and I'll put Jimmy's email address up here. Oh. I thought that I clicked that off. Okay, so this is Jimmy's email. If you, like I said, if you just got to buy more than one thing, whatever 2 things that you want, then you get a free shirt, and supplies on the shirts are limited. We want to go through all of these shirts, and then we'll do a new one. It's a wrong cam shirt. We'll do a new one. Let's see. Here we go. Feel like I've hit the nail on the head. They do feel right. And I remember when I was racing the Del Sol in Motorola Cup, the team that I was with also had a Type R. So the Type R was obviously faster. I was driving this Del Sol, and they also had a Civic Si. So it's pretty cool. I like the Del Sol better than I like the Civic Si. It was shorter, and it was smaller. I just kind of liked it better. Yes, see if you can retard time with knock sensors. The Eldorado had EFI, an old analog Bosch system, but it worked. I have to ream and sleeve a lifter bore. Uh-oh. Richard, did you drive into the Motor Trend sale? I don't know what you mean by that. Did I drive into it? I don't have anything to do with Motor Trend, so I don't know what that is. I watched your video with a custom 4.6 intake manifold. Yeah, it was, I did a lot of those. I built a 97 Civic sedan, K20Z3 swap with an 08 Civic SI. Ran an NA at 200, ran 1250s at 105. A turbo kit on Marketplace, made 367 at 9 pounds. 1150s at 125. Now 431 at 11 pounds. Cool. This thing was, this stock B16 was like, I think we ended up doing 255 or something like that. Activate the knock sensors with boost or nitrous. Can that be done? Are you talking about activating a knock sensor so that it will intentionally pull timing as your timing retard for nitrous or a turbo? You could fake that signal to the ECU if that's what you're talking about and trying to do. Seems to appear turbo to be superior on a small displacement. Vortech Supercharger has to be up at least 50 crankshaft horsepower before more like 100 plus at high boost. A Vortech Supercharger will never be up on a turbo, not on any kind of motor, nor will any supercharger. It takes too much power to drive the supercharger, and they're not typically as efficient as a turbo is. But the parasitic loss is the big thing. That's why they make, I mean, more power than, you can see here, the turbo is better. How do you feel about Holley's self-learn on Terminator X? Does it work good, or should I have it dyno tuned or street tuned? I don't agree with ever running, just stepping on the throttle and letting the computer tune anything by itself. I don't do that. Once we do the tuning and get it right, then we give it parameters plus or minus, let's say 5% or something, and have it, and then you could run it under closed loop. But otherwise I don't do that. I don't have it tuned by itself. And the tuning part of it, like wide open throttle stuff, is good. But in my opinion, the real tuning that a tuner does, which makes those guys so much better than what I do, is getting it to do it under all the conditions and under all the different gears and loads and transitions and cold starts and all of that stuff. And I don't do any of that on the engine dyno. When using heavier valves with 11/32 stems, is it necessary to have additional spring pressure? Yes, all other things being equal, if the valve is heavier, it needs more spring rate. We see that a lot on LS stuff because there's a big variation in the valve weights on factory LS valves. Yeah, Sergeant, the first time I saw that done on the knock sensor thing was something that had a factory knock sensor. They were activating it on a neon, on a turbo neon. And I've talked about this many times. I'm sure that that's what he was doing, was purposely activating the knock sensor. I don't know how he made that happen, but he was sending a knock sensor signal to the ECU and it was retarding timing. I don't remember. It's been a long time since and this is somebody telling me about this, that they were doing a dyno day at Powertrain Dynamics of neons and things like that. And he had done a turbo kit on it, and that's how he had done it. I don't remember what the parameter was. I don't remember how much, like that if you sent that signal, I don't know how much it was pulling timing, and if it continued for a longer time, did it pull more timing? Because there's a whole control strategy for the knock sensor stuff, that if it hears it once, it may not do anything. If it hears it again, then it might do something. If it hears it again after that, then it does more. It gets more aggressive in its timing pulls. So you'd have to know what that strategy is if you then did like trick it and send a signal to it. I saw Calvin put a track hawk blower on an LS. Is that a Hemi thing? Near. Remember a video saying a top fuel supercharger 1471 uses 900 horsepower to turn. Yeah, it's at least that. It might even be more than that. Would it be a bad idea to run a big supercharger on a small motor? I've never seen someone do it, so guessing it's not ideal because of parasitic loss. I don't know. What is it you're trying to accomplish by putting a big supercharger on a K24? I don't know what you're trying to get done. You would all, just like with the turbo, you would size the supercharger for the desired power output on the motor that you're running it on. So because you put a top fuel blower on a K24, it's not going to do anything. The K24 is not even going to be able to spin it, first of all, because it doesn't make enough power to spin that blower. But you would size the blower for the power output that you want, which is why most guys just put a turbo in there, because it's a lot easier and it makes it a lot faster. Will a stock Gen 4 LS injector support 500 crank horsepower? Which one? There's like 7 different factory LS injectors. So the most powerful one, the highest flowing one, is the flex fuel injector, which is a 50 pounder, and that will support 800 NA horsepower on an LS. Be cool to know how to signal the knock sensor. Yeah, and they all might not be the same. I don't know if it's converting that, which is basically just like an amplifier or something, the way that the knock sensor works. But I don't know what signal it's sending. I don't know if it's sending a 5-volt signal or what signal it's sending out. Will a forged crankshaft reduce or negate additional stress from a supercharger? I don't know what you mean. A forged crankshaft will be stronger than a cast crankshaft. And on blower applications where you're driving the blower off of the crank, additional strength particularly up in the snout of that crank, can be a good idea. Not necessary on a turbo application, because it's not driving the blower like that. So there's not that concern. There's only the concern for, the load that you're putting it on. Time 900 is about where my friends tell me they dyno the blowers. Yep. That's a lot. I way back in this is probably in the 80s. I remember them talking to one of the top fuel guys that were doing the blowers, and he was spinning it with some sort of V8 that he had, a 351 Windsor, I think, and that I remember him saying that we had to step up in the motor. We had to build another motor for our test fixture because the motor wasn't strong enough to spin these blowers. And so I don't remember what the number was. I want to say it was 500 horsepower, 600 horsepower, something like that. But he had to make more power to do it. And pin the crank pulleys on blowers, a good idea. Yeah, the Vortech stuff, we ended up having to do that when I've shown you guys before the dedicated kit that we made with a cog pulley setup for the land speed thing that we were originally doing with the Vortech stuff. We made my buddy Bernie made that blower kit that mounts the blower instead of a jack shaft like that, like this one. Instead of this jack shaft assembly, it was actually mounted down where the AC is, and so it's close to the crank. It's on that front side, but you have the same thing. We kept shearing. The Honda, like a small block Chevy, has a keyed crank, and so the pulley's keyed, but we kept shearing the keyways on that, and so it needed 2 of them. At least 2 of them. Looks like people are catching on to compressed air supercharging. I saw 1320 video talking about, they called it the new technology. Well, and it is new if they've introduced it and guys are racing with it now. Because before, and this has been several years now, this is before COVID that we were doing this, that the guys from the company, compressed air supercharging, were the only ones that I knew of that were doing that. They had a car, they had it running in a car, and they were out making hits in it, and then also doing the stuff on the dyno with Jeff Smith. Did a great story on that. Mentioned the dyno graph earlier about how you want the torque to come up and level out. What do you think of the graph I emailed you? I don't know which one you're talking about. My response earlier about a torque curve was particularly on a Honda. What we tend to see here is, I don't know if I have the, I don't think I have the NA curve here. Let's see here. No, not really. So if you can imagine the torque curve being flat, almost straight across with a little dip around 100 foot-pounds, that's what the NA curve is going to kind of look like. Let's see here. I can bring up the NA power curve. Yeah, to give you an idea. So the NA torque curve at 3,000 RPM is making 100 foot-pounds. At 5,000 RPM, it's making 100 foot-pounds. Has a slight dip around 4,000 to 4,500. And then when we go into VTEC, it's 110 foot-pounds. Yeah, 110, and then falls back down to 100 out at 75, and out at 8,000, it's down below 100 foot-pounds. But it basically just goes, the torque curve comes up and it goes, and it's just all hovering like right at or slightly above 100 foot-pounds of torque. So that's the torque curve on the VTEC. Like I said, the way that they engage that secondary camshaft, the motor gets much more efficient. But as long as, like, if you were to take something and make 100 foot-pounds like a B16 would, and make 100 foot-pounds at 3,000 RPM and also make 100 foot-pounds at 8,000 RPM, you would have a climbing power curve. Huge electric motor or a small but Chevy to turn a huge heavy flywheel. Either dyno works the same way. Yeah, and I think that the motor that he had, the guy that was doing this on this test, if I remember right, I think he had a pulley set up to make it work, essentially a gear reduction deal. Getaway, what's going on? I'm sorry, but saying that a 200 horsepower K24 would not be able to turn a top fuel blower is ridiculous. It won't take that much power at a lower boost level on a smaller engine. Okay. That's not accurate, but okay. The crank snout is oversized because of the blower pulley. I know that we've said something bad about your K24, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way. Crank snout is oversized because of the blower pulley. Yeah. Keys on the Honda cranks are so sloppy from the factory. Yeah, it wallered it out pretty good when we were running the Vortech stuff. I don't know why it never dawned on us to just drill and pin the other side of it. I was talking to all kinds of people, the guys from AccuFab and everybody. Hey, how can we broach this crank and put another keyway? And he's like, that's just too much. That's too much work for what you're trying to do. A turbo K24 nitro would be better than a top fuel blower on a K24. Yeah, that's. I mean, I could see somebody wanting to do that as a gee whiz thing. Not a top fuel blower, but some kind of 671 or 871 if they wanted to do something silly like that. Honestly, it'd be better to put a 2650 or something if they wanted to really do that. But it's just not like you don't want to have a 100, 200, 300 or more horsepower loss that it takes to drive a supercharger, you know, at the flow rate and boost level that you're doing it. You don't want to have that loss. You want to just put a turbo on it. For K24, a larger blower wouldn't have to work as hard to move the same amount of air. Like the M90, they put on the 2.4 liter Ecotech. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. What's the compressed air? Is it pure oxygen, or it's just atmosphere? It's just compressed atmospheric air, not pure oxygen. Pure oxygen would be very volatile. But the bolts are over torqued to make up for the slop. Yeah, the crank bolt is pretty seriously tightened. And if I remember right, I think that it's reverse thread, which victimized me a couple of times. Seen some videos of compressed air supercharging. Yeah, it is neat stuff. The charge air temperature on those things is amazing. Is it possible to overdrive or underdrive the supercharger with that shaft pulley with that setup? Yes, you do that with pulley ratios. You do that with pulley ratios on the front side of the shaft, just like you do with any blower. So you can see over here, if we look underneath this blue plate right here, there's the drive pulley for the blower. So that pulley ratio with the crank pulley dictates how fast the blower is spinning. And then obviously the engine RPM as well. Because the engine RPM has a wide sweep, it goes to 8,000 RPM on the V16. You know, you got to be careful about what you're doing with pulleys, because even though you'd want more boost down low, you could see from 7,000 to 8,000, this thing really ramps up. So what we did is there are a couple of different factory size crank pulleys. The non-VTEC one and the VTEC one are different size. And then you can run different size blower pulleys that just slide on just like they do on a blower. They just slide onto this shaft. And it's not splined on that end. It's just like the snout of a blower on this side. The pulley just slides on with a key, just like they do on a blower, just like they do on any other Vortech blower. And then you can change that pulley size. So you can make the crank pulley big, make that pulley small, spin the blower faster, all that magic happens. We also, when we were doing it, because they didn't have bigger crank pulleys, which is what we wanted, we made our own. And we ended up using it was a pulley from either a 5-liter or a 4.6 Ford. It was either a crank pulley or a power steering pulley or something. And then my buddy Bernie again machined the factory Honda damper to accept this bigger pulley that bolted on top of it that was even bigger. And it was like, I want to say it was like 7 inches or something. So we could speed the thing up quite a bit. And because like with everything, when you start going small on the blower pulley, and this was only like a 4-rib or a 3-rib, so it was not ideal. And when we did the one from the Mustang, that was a 6-rib, so that we had 6-rib pulleys made and spaced properly. You know, we went through all the normal things that you do when you're doing blower pulley stuff. Where'd you get the jack shaft? That's part of a Vortech kit. They made that kit I put it on the Del Sol. They didn't make it for a Del Sol. They made it for this model Civic Si, the 99 2000 B16 that was in that factory, in that motor, the motor factory in that car, but it was also in this one, and so it bolted right on. That's a kit that they used to sell. I don't know if they do that anymore. Power steering would get a little squirrely. Have you ever tested a Rotrex Craftwork supercharger? Yes, I have. I know Oscar Jackson very well, and I've been there when they've done lots of those tests. I use that I think I have Rotrex kits in the K series book that I did. Got attacked by a dog the other day. Oh, a dozen stitches, 8 staples in my leg. Really? What kind of dog was it? Sorry to hear that, Sergeant. Why aren't people using 500, 600 horsepower K24s? Why are they using blowers on them? Like I said, if you have a 600 horsepower blower that you're using. Like we made, what do we make? I think we were making a little over 500 at the tire on one of these Vortech deals on that Civic before we switched over to turbo stuff. But it took a lot. It was, it was 20 plus pounds, and so it was not ideal. But you lose so much from driving the blower that the turbo, and as we saw in the curve, not only would you lose like peak power, but you guys want average power. So if we're looking at acceleration and we're running this thing from 6,000 to 8,000 or whatever, you just have a lot more average power production. Just add nitrous to the top fuel blower. B-series Hondas are left-handed threads for the balancer. I don't think many turbos would be happy with 3,000 degree exhaust going through it. Top fuel exhaust is 3,000. That's a lot. Leave it to a machinist, take a part that would not go on one thing and make it fit on something else. Went to change oxygen sensors and somebody hardwired it instead of using a plug. What a pain. Is there a good reason to do that? I don't know why they would think that a plug, like factory style plugs for O2 sensors, would ever come unplugged, especially like on the truck. They have a plug that's a clip plug, so you have to push it down to unplug it. Like it's not going to vibrate loose. But then they also have that little safety pin that goes in there, like the grenade safety pin that goes through it. So you really can't even push it. It can't unlock. And so 350,000 miles later and 25 years or whatever, 23 years, that thing's never come unclipped. Yeah, I don't know why they would hardwire it unless they screwed up the plug, unless the plug was broke or something. What was the best power on the B16 with the turbo setup? I don't think we ever, on that particular turbo, I'd have to look at the engine dyno stuff. We didn't ever turn it up more than about 10 pounds, 10 or 11 pounds. I think on one of the runs it was 260 or something. Let's see here. I did some, yeah, this one was, yeah, 269, 270 is as much as we made on this one. This turbo was not very big. I think that this turbo on the engine dyno was about a 300 or 350 horsepower turbo, if I remember right. It was a catalog. Good thing I had Red Wing boots on, or it would have been worse. Yeah. What, were you out walking in a field or something? What was this in the what was in the land speed car? The land speed car was a completely different motor. It wasn't a B16. It was a B18 based motor, which we had two of them. One of them was a sleeved GSR motor. The other one was a dart block. And those were right at 2 liters because that's the class that we ran in. It had ported heads, cam, bigger turbo. One of them was an 87.2 crank. The other was an 89 non-VTEC crank. One of them was a good bit under the 2 liter displacement. The other one was right near 2 liters. They had 84 millimeter bores. They had Type R intake manifolds, ported Type R intake manifolds, bigger throttle bodies, And when we ran it on the engine dyno at like 725 or 730. That was at like 29 pounds, and then we didn't go more than that. But that was with a 76 millimeter turbo. In the car, when we ran it at Bonneville, and we ran it with ice water, and we ran race gas in it, we ran it at about 500 at the tire, maybe. At like 17 pounds. What happened to the Big Bang? I haven't done the K-Series one yet. Exactly, on the Crown Vic even has a clip to hold the wires, and the driver's side is the worst one. Yeah, those kind of things can be kind of a pain, but usually needle nose will clip that thing so you could pull it out. I like just getting rid of those, but here are engineers in a room together. It's like, okay, we want the oxygen sensor to not move. Okay, so the sensor wire needs to have one of those little clips or the little plugs that push into a hole so it holds the clip in place, so that it's not going to dangle around. Okay, that's great. Okay, now we plug in the plug has to have a clip in it so that it stops the thing. It can't be pulled back out. It can never pull back out. You have to actually push it together. And then we're going to hold that in. We're going to have another clip that pushes in, like the grenade pin that I was talking about. And then that grenade pin, so nobody loses the grenade pin, has to have a safety wire on it attached to the whole plug. I'm like, why don't you just now tape it all up and make sure that it never goes anywhere? I was breaking up a fight with 3 dogs. Oh, okay. So yeah, you stepped into that. Yeah, I've done that before. It's not fun. Was the Del Sol faster than the Omni? I just now have the Omni, and I never ran the Del Sol at a track or anything. But this is making more power than the Omni does right now, or this one did at 250, 260, whatever at the tire. The Omni doesn't make that. It's basically a stock motor. What'd you have to do the transaxle on the Honda to handle the torque? We didn't do anything to it. It was well, we did one thing to it just so that we could have the gearing that we needed. We made a final drive. We made a 4.0 final drive. And for Honda guys will know that that's not a 426 or a 440. So we wanted more gearing, and then we put that in the LS GS non-VTEC transaxle because it had better gearing in it, or at least a higher top speed potential 5th gear. And so we put that combination together, but otherwise it was stock. The axles were stock. All of that was stock. We did on the axles, on the boots, put the steel reinforced zip ties on those, so that because at speed, what would happen is the axle boot would balloon out, and it would, when it ballooned out from speed, centrifugal force, it would suck the axle, the boot off of it, and just sling grease everywhere. And then if you kept running it like that, the U joints would go bad, or the axle joints would go bad. Lived in Salt Lake 30 years, still haven't made a speed week. You got to go over there. What did the Civic weigh stripped down? We didn't have to strip it down. The Civic had all the interior in it. It was all other than what we had to do for the cage. At Bonneville, you don't want the thing to weigh less. Now the Del Sol was stripped way down. The racing weight for the Del Sol when I was running US touring car was, I don't remember the weight. I'd have to look it up. I want to say a little over 2,000 pounds on the Del Sol. I was surprised the damage a 50-pound dog can do. Yeah, if you let them get at you, if they can get a bite in, it could be bad. I was wondering if you've ever messed with any 8 Series Hondas. I haven't. I mean, I've been there when they've been doing that. Like I did some stuff with Oscar Jackson. They used to have blower kits for the Preludes and stuff. And so we did some testing at his facility, but I've never put any together. Everyone wants the B Series trans. Yeah, for what we were doing, I wanted the non-VTEC stuff. And I remember putting one of the other things that I did about a 1990 non-VTEC Integra with a B18A or B in it. And I took that out and put a B16 in it, but kept the non-VTEC trans. It was a slug like that. But I wanted, good fuel mileage. But that was a Rottweiler bite force can be 330 psi. I tried buying a Porsche piston kit to go from 3.3 to 3.4, 7.1 to 7.7, and found that Molly won't ship to California. Wow. I'm surprised I don't see more people doing accurate MDX stuff, even swaps. All-wheel drive 3.7. It seems like a good foundation. I like the guys that are doing all-wheel drive Civics. Those are cool. Mighty Car Mods displaying how good my car is for drifting. Which car is that? And we got 1 more minute. 1 more minute. Ship it to Hawaii? That seems like a lot. Yeah, let me know, Dan. We could get you taken care of. Got me when my back was turned. Grabbed me and shook his head. Yeah, they're good at that. And they know when your back is turned. That's how wild animals work. Thirdly Ace BA XR8 with a 5.4. What L's variant holds the most power? I don't know what you mean. How much power do you want? Oh, she's over in Hawaii. Okay. Yeah, all-wheel drive stuff is cool. I've been watching that. I told you guys I've been watching that Car Wow stuff where they do all those acceleration tests, and it's it's amazing. I mean, there's no shortage of power in a lot of these supercars, but if you don't have the traction to put it down, you can't lay all that power out. Other cars just walk away from you that have the right combination of power output and traction. And the Tesla Plaid is a perfect example of that. What's your favorite Honda and what's your dream Honda? I don't think I really have a dream Honda. One of those Toyota convertibles would be cool. But those are like millions of dollars. And then I think like with a Gen 3 RX-7, I'd like to have a factory Type R. An NSX. I had an NSX and I loved it. And now, obviously, once we let it go, then we would want another. And Jimmy has one, and I rode it. I'm like, I kind of want this car now, especially his that's making 750 at the tire or whatever. And his is a 3.5, so it's like got torque. The one thing about the NSX is I won a lot of races in that against guys in Corvettes because it's been the tires, and that the NSX didn't have the power, but it in the lower gears it had gearing, and it would hook up, and so I would get the jump on them. But so like first gear and second gear were really fun when the thing was NA, but otherwise it was, it's such a good car. It's like it's a Japanese Ferrari is what I called it. It was great looking. Lisa got to drive it when we were first dating, and so we drove out around a whole bunch, and they're fantastic cars. It's just that, like everything else, with another 200 horsepower, they were a really good car. Is there such thing as a stock Type R? I think with what Type Rs are probably selling for, they probably are restored ones now. An RX-8, I don't like RX-8s. I don't like the way that they look. Soarer convertible. What's the Toyota 2000? I think is. Yeah, is it the 2000 GT? What is it? No, not a Toyota 2002. Come on. Yes, the 2000 GT. That's a James Bond car. One of those would be nice. And I also saw the other day when I made my wife stop. She's like, "What are you talking about?" A Nash Metropolitan. This is around the corner, sitting around the corner. It's yellow, so it's not the color that I would want, but it would be cool. It is a Japanese Ferrari. It is. It's like looks like a Ferrari, but drives like a Honda Civic, which I love. SX made the right sound and looked really cool. I agree. They're nice. Honda S2000s. Yeah, a Honda S2000's that doesn't really do it for me. Like, I love the motor. I think that's fantastic. And I love that it's rear wheel drive, but it's just not, that car doesn't speak to me. Check out Kyle's twin engine Prelude. I'll have to look at that. They weren't fast. A Dodge Stealth Turbo. Yeah, a 300 horsepower motor is better than or a 350 horsepower. I think this was 300. The 300ZX twin turbo Nissan. Again, like I said, Honda needed that car. It needed to be. It was an exotic car, so it needed to have exotic car kind of power. It needed to be a 400 or 500 horsepower deal, and they could have easily done that. 1JZ 2000 GT would be good. I don't think that I would swap that one, but Chrysler Conquest. Yeah, I'm a Starion owner. I've owned a Starion before. A 68 Coronet RT. That car to me, I know what they are and I appreciate them and I've seen them and I like them, but they're too big. That's not my kind of car. I like the Barracuda and the Challenger. I like those better for Dodges. But again, everybody gets to like the thing that they like. But the car that I really want is the is a McLaren F1. Plymouth Fire Arrow. I know what those are. NSX was efficient. I love how it was made, like the Ford GT. I had one of those. I had both of those. And the Ford GT was really, really cool. But again, it just needed more power, but it was so easy to get more power from those motors with put a Kenny Bell on it, or even just get a Mazda 323 GTX, also very, very cool. That would be in the stable. 71 Challenger. I like those. And I like a TA 6-pack one. F1 would be great with another 300 horsepower. Exactly. Mine would have turbos on it. I was just driving a Starion near a car wash at work. Came around the corner sideways. Perfect drift. Mr. H was standing there watching with a big grin on his face. Nice. 429 Cobra Jet Torino. I like those too. A guy brought a Torino Talladega into Westech, and it's my favorite car that's been at Westech. It had a Kazi like Boss 429 base motor in it, and it was all done up with steel wheels and everything, like as a cup car. And there's been $1 million cars there, and I'm like, this is the one. This is what it was, a 4-speed. It was a Jericho, and I'm like, oh, this is the one that I like. This is my favorite one. And not because I'm necessarily a Ford guy or a Torino guy necessarily. It's just the one that, it spoke to me. It would be the perfect kind of Silver State car, because we were always saying that when we were going there, Bernie and Jimmy and I were like, the best car to bring out here is a Winston Cup car, back when they were Winston Cup cars, because it has to have enough movement, and those cars are fast and aero, so it's got all of the speed and power that it needs. Because one guy brought an American Indy car out there, and it broke in like 5 miles. It just broke the tub on it because it was just hitting the ground. I love that Gordon Murray had a Mark I Escort built, restored for him, the average guy's car. I like those too. I would love an Escort, a Cosworth Escort deal, or like I said, the Mercure. Torino Talladega, yeah, that's a good one. 426 Belvedere, not specifically a sports car, but an 82 Ford Falcon with a Group C 4 flares, a NASCAR powertrain. There you go. Look up a True Blue XT Falcon. Australia's had some cool stuff. Mostly I look at not so much the cars, but I like the engine specs. And I like that we look at all the stuff that Europe got and Australia got, and stuff that we didn't get in the United States. I hated reading the car magazines back in the day, Road and Track and Car and Driver and Motor Trend and all those, Automobile. because it would always be the same. Oh, here's the Porsche 924 Turbo that you're getting, and here's the really super cool one that everybody else is getting. Same thing with Ferrari or whatever. Here, you guys are getting the 250 horsepower one, and the guys over in Europe are getting the 330 horsepower one. I'm like, come on. A 64 Falcon Sprint. Yep, those are good. An Alpine GT. Yep, we never got that stuff. Or the what is it? A Lotus Carlton? Was that it? Was that what it was? Australian beaches. The Australian accents are good. Wish we got the Mercure XR4. For a long time when I was younger, I wanted a Cobra, and then I got to drive around in them a lot. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really want one of these anymore. It was fun driving it around, and for short distances, it was cool. Like for driving down Newport Beach or whatever, it'd be cool. Did you keep a Barra? I have 2 Barras, but I'm just waiting to get them back to the guys that own them. What's the new car that has a vacuum? That's the McMurtry. Is that what it's called? What's coming up for testing? I'm going to do, the next thing I'm going to do is more turbo testing. I think I'm going to try to do a draw through setup too. Jensen Interceptor. Yeah, I have a good Jensen Interceptor story. Lotus Carlton was a real weapon. Yeah, because that didn't that have a twin turbo 6-cylinder or something in it? Cobras are scary, especially big blocks. I put enough time into AC Cobras not to want one. Yeah. Maybe a 91730. Oh, I just don't think you could drive that around on the street though. I remember I got the Jimmy and the guys at HP did the turbo setup on the NSX not too long before I sold it, and I remember getting it and driving it. I'm like, oh man, this is what it should have felt like, because it was making, you know, instead of 200 at the tire, it was making like 400 at the tire. I'm like, oh, this is so much better. Trans Am had a draw through turbo. Yep. Street legal 917 in England. Yeah, there was the Lotus Carlton. It was a straight 6. Pertinent. What engine are you talking about? I don't own any Barra engines. They belong to somebody else. There's 2 of them. They're the I want to say green tops. They're the naturally aspirated ones. You still have any intakes I've made? I do have some of them. I have a few Miata ones. I have a Yaris one. I have the couple of the Scion ones. I have the Nissan Versa intake. 84 Dodge Turbo. I have a couple of those motors. An Opel Manta, if that's what you're talking about. RB testing definitely needs to happen. There are 60 in 2 seconds. That when did they ever time one of those? I'd be surprised that it had a good 0 to 60 time. I remember when Penske and Donahue got that car, and the guys from Porsche brought it over from Germany. It wasn't even tuned to drive around. They had a hard time getting it started, and even just driving it, they're like, "This is terrible." They're like, "Yeah, but it's for racing. You're never racing it around." They're like, "No, we have to drive like yellow flag laps and stuff. We have to drive it out to where we start the race. This thing has to have some kind of like programming for drivability." And then they're like, oh, okay, well, wait till he drives this. This is making more power than anybody could possibly want. And the first thing he said, this is nice, but could you make it more? Could we make more power? Sandrails had draw through VW with T-Bird junkyard turbos back in the day. Yeah, a lot of VWs had draw through stuff. 4.6 intakes. I sold all the modular stuff. Yeah, the throttle was an on-off switch. Yeah, it was exciting. I remember listening to a thing that Brian Redmond said about Mark Donahue. His amazing stuff. On that note, it is time to go, but I will see you guys all tomorrow. And remember, there's a sale going on, so go buy stuff from richardholderperformance.com and get a free t-shirt.